Hey friends, welcome to Wednesday night. We are live, actually live. So this week, starting a new series. Figured I'd do it live, just in case there are any questions or any comments. Then we could field them in real time. But yeah, we're live tonight. And next week will not be live, but it'll still go live at 7 o'clock. So those of you who are keeping track with the not quite live and the live-ish throughout the fall, it's been good times, but we still meet at 7 o'clock. Still get a little Bible in the middle of the week, some time to get together, which is good. Brookridge people, and actually those local and those not local, reminder of a Brookridge Christmas concert. It is a Brookridge tradition, and we do it up. There's snow inside the building. It's good times, and that is coming Saturday, December 13th at 6 p.m. If you are in the area, you could set aside some time. We'd love for you to be there. We will also be streaming, but not quite the same as being in the room. So that's the deal. All right. Like I said earlier, new series. I thought Christmas season going into 2026 that we should dive into the book of Judges. So we're going to do that. Judges, lots of fun, but we're going to do it. So here's the deal. Anybody in the last 10 or 20 years that's done a series on Judges has taken notes from Tim Keller. He wrote a book called Judges for You, and it's pretty much the gold standard for studying the book. There are commentaries. There are plenty of other people that have written on Judges, but most of the guys I listen to have read Keller's book, Judges for You. So those of you who are familiar with it, you might see some of the threads throughout this series, but Judges. So a little bit of background. We know the story of God delivering Israel out of captivity in Egypt. Moses leads them across the Red Sea, and then they start traveling across the wilderness toward Canaan, which was the promised land. Because of a lack of faith, Israel has to stay in the wilderness for 40 extra years before crossing the Jordan River into the promised land. Remember, they sent 12 spies in to spy out the land. 12 spies come back. 10 of them are like, nope, everybody's too big. Giants, can't do it. And then 2 of them said, oh, we absolutely can do it. And one of them was named Joshua. One of them was named Caleb. But Joshua and Caleb were the only ones who survived for those 40 extra years and were actually able to see the promised land. So then Moses dies. Joshua takes over. Joshua, you may remember, was the mighty warrior general who led them into Canaan. You can read the book of Joshua for more details, like the famous battle at Jericho. Then we get to Judges. The book of Judges is kind of like a museum of Israel's spiritual history, particularly the first 2 chapters that we're going to look at this week and next. We get a snapshot of Israel's rocky history with God. We see them go up and down in their faith, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, usually just lukewarm. And there are certain temptations that they just couldn't seem to shake. So I feel like that's something that we can relate to, right? Do you ever ask, why am I up and down so much spiritually? A lot of us feel like we're spiritually bipolar. Like, is that a real condition? Like, one week I'm a super Christian, and then the next week I'm not even sure I believe. Or do you ever ask, why are there some sins that no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to get rid of? Or why do I have so little joy spiritually? Everybody else at church seems to really have it together, and I feel like I'm just dragging myself along. Am I doing something wrong? Here's the reality. Everybody is messed up once you get to know them. Like, we all have our hangups. We all have our brokenness. If you can't see it, you just probably don't know them well enough yet. So the first two chapters are Israel's spiritual struggles recounted and explained. You'll see your struggles in theirs, and it's cyclical, as you'll see. And then, so what we want to look at this week and next are three core principles that the writer of Judges uses to shape the rest of the book. So the book opens like this. So you'll want to read Judges 1 and 2 just to check my facts. But verse 1 starts off at saying, after the death of Joshua. So he'd seen a lot of great victories like Jericho, but after he died, there were still parts of Canaan, the promised land, yet to be conquered. So they weren't done yet. So after the death of Joshua, the people inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I've given the land into his hand. And things start out great. In verse 4, then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand. They defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. Adonai Bezek in verse 6, which literally in Hebrew means king of Bezek. He fled, but they pursued him. They caught him. They cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Ow, because that's what you do, apparently. Verse 7, Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. So if we digress for just a minute, one of the problems people sometimes have with the book of Judges and the Old Testament is they ask, how could God send in Israel to conquer a people? It looks like a religious crusade and it looks unjust. It's a good question, but did you hear that question? The king, did you hear King Adonai Bezek's perspective on this whole thing? He didn't say after his thumbs and his big toes were cut off, God, this is so unfair. I can't believe you've done this. You've sent in these barbarians to hurt me. He said, God has repaid me for my wickedness. In Deuteronomy 18 and Leviticus 18, God made clear to Israel that he was driving the Canaanites out because of their excessive wickedness. Israel was his instrument of judgment. They were not innocent people that Israel was going in and stealing land from. They were cruel and they were wicked people that God was bringing judgment upon. Israel was his instrument of justice in doing so. Hey, you could say, well, that mentality sounds dangerous. People taking on themselves the mantle of God to be his instruments of justice. Very true. People who adopt that mentality today have committed some of the most horrific acts of injustice. The difference is that Israel back then had a clear mandate and clear instructions from God. God simply doesn't do that anymore. With the coming of Jesus, God began a new way of working in the world. Jesus came on a saving mission, a rescuing mission, and those who follow him participate in that saving and rescuing mission. He didn't take life, he laid his down. So in following him, we give mercy and not justice. We don't take lives, we lay down our lives. One day, Jesus will bring judgment and justice to the world, but our role now is to dispense mercy, not judgment. Anyone today who claims they're on a mandate from God to bring judgment is either lying or pathologically deceived, for sure. Maybe you say, but surely in these conquests, there were innocent people affected, like kids. And it's true. Innocent people sometimes get caught up in judgment. That's not just something that happens in Judges. It happens today. If a guy cheats on his wife or cheats in his business and loses his marriage or his job, you might look at that person and say, well, he brought it on himself. And you would be right. But what about his kids? They suffer too. And the suffering they endure is because of the sins of their father that they had no part in. There's multiple ways the Bible answers the question of why God allows the innocent to be caught up in somebody else's justice. But one thing the Bible assures us of is that before the throne of God, everyone receives full, complete, and perfect justice, and that what we inherit in eternity will make anything we experience on earth seem very trivial. Think of it like this. Say the U.S. Post Office overcharged you like 40 cents on a stamp, and you went in to complain, and they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to release you from any future obligation to pay income tax. You would probably say, on the whole, that you did pretty well in your engagement with the post office. A very positive interaction. 10 out of 10 stars. Yes, you were overcharged, and while you may have complained at the time, when all was said and done, you're not going to spend a lot of time complaining that you were treated unfairly by the U.S. government as you skip tax season for the rest of your life. That's never going to happen, by the way, but when someone suffers or dies unfairly, we can rest assured that before the throne of God, they'll receive perfect justice. And what they inherit in eternity makes up for anything they may have suffered on earth. All people eventually die, right? That's 100% guarantee. We all die. And for those kids, maybe God just collected them early, and what they received when they stood before God was full and fair and made anything they endured on earth seem trivial. I know that doesn't answer the question fully, but hopefully it gives you a place to start. Let's get back to our story in Judges. Verse 19 of chapter 1 says, "And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron." And you're like, I guess that makes sense, right? Chariots of iron. These were like the tanks of the ancient world. Just a couple dozen of them could just mow down hundreds of foot soldiers, which were all Israel had. It was like, of course, they couldn't conquer these people. You know, historically, we're the first ones to work with iron, the Philistines. So Israel says, that's why we couldn't drive them out. Verse 27, "And Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or Ibleam and its villages, or Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites there were determined to dwell in that land." Well, these people were just really difficult. I know, God, you sent us in to conquer and take this land. We asked them very politely to leave, and then they talked really tough. They raised their voices. They sent some strongly worded emails. They mounted a few attacks. But these people were stubborn. So eventually Israel drew a line across the room and was like, okay, we won't bother you if you won't bother us. But then in verse 28, when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor. And you think kind of, well, that's win-win, right? Instead of driving them out like God said, they got some free work out of them. Tim Keller says this: taken on its own terms, chapter 1 reads like a collection of Israel's press releases about their campaign. It's like a spin on why they weren't as successful as we and God might have expected. As we read, we're lulled into sympathy with the Israelites. And when we're told that they could not drive out the Canaanites, we're inclined to agree. They did their best, and they found a more economical solution to boot. They got free labor out of the Canaanites. All in all, pretty savvy, if you ask me. But then comes God's assessment. God said, "You have not obeyed my voice," period. And then chapter 2 starts like this: "Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim. He said, I brought you up from Egypt. I brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. You shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. I brought you up from Egypt, brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers, yet you have not obeyed my voice. What is this that you have done?" We're in Judges chapter 2. "So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and your gods shall be a snare to you." So this is lesson number 1 from the book of Judges. We're just starting it out. Small areas of disbelief produce large areas of disaster. Small areas of disbelief produce large areas of disaster. So these Canaanites that they left alive they become a thorn in Israel's side. They become a source of constant warfare. And eventually some of these people, like the Philistines, would rise up and conquer and enslave them. Those of you who've been following with us at Brookridge on Sundays, we fast forwarded, and we've been talking in 1st and 2nd Samuel through the life of David, and the Philistines were constantly attacking the Israelites. Israel was like, hey, but God, we can't drive them out. We tried. God says, actually, it's not that you can't, it's that you won't. God says it has nothing to do with you not being strong enough, because it's never been about your strength. It has to do with you not being confident enough in God's grace. Remember Jericho? I remember the Israelites just marched around the wall. It had nothing to do with their strength. The walls coming down had nothing to do with them. Yeah, they just marched around the walls. They yelled. They sang. God's like, do you think I can continue to take care of these Canaanites? Here's a question that you and I should ask ourselves. Where are we saying, I can't, but God says, actually, you won't drive them out? You need to look at your life like the unconquered land of Canaan. Lurking in the crevices of our hearts, our own little Canaanites of unbelief and sin. We're saying, I can't. And God's saying, no, it's you won't. Here's a few things, like integrity. God, if I was totally honest in my job, I'd lose it. Can't be expected to play fairly in this field and survive. How about an extending forgiveness? I know I should forgive him or her, but I just can't. Avoiding temptation. I know it's wrong, but I can't say no. A lot of times people will start rationalizing their behavior and they'll twist the Bible to fit their preferences. Surely the Bible can't say this is wrong because God wants me to be happy, right? Or this is just who I am, or I really love them. Maybe that compromises being in a relationship with somebody that you know that you shouldn't be in. I've known all kinds of single people over the years who get in or stay in relationships they know they shouldn't be in because, God, I'm afraid of being lonely. How about people that forsake community and connection because they think they have to work all the time or because you just don't like being with people? One of the most, another common compromise is in generosity, financial faithfulness to God. God, I can barely afford the way things are, much less be generous. Uh, Give God the first fruits. Like that doesn't make sense. On the other side, there's wealthy people who just be like, I'm not sure the church is the best investment for our future. These are areas that become areas of defeat where the enemy can bring curses into our lives. Take unforgiveness, right? Paul says in Ephesians, when you won't forgive, you give a foothold to the devil. Satan sets up an outpost in the promised land of your heart that he uses to tear you apart. You're like, but God, I just can't. And God's like, no, you won't. It had nothing to do with your inability to obey. It was because you aren't confident enough in my strength. Israel hadn't ceased to be zealously religious, they'd ceased to walk by faith. And there's a huge difference in those two. The mark that you're walking by faith is full and absolute, unconditional, and uncompromised obedience. There's two ways to approach a relationship with God. One in which you do your own thing, but you try to do enough to keep God happy so you can use him as a safety net. It's the vast majority of church people. The other way is you yield total control to him and trust him completely. And the only question when you're walking in that way of life becomes, what does God want? If you're simply a religious person, you're going to hit places where you think you just can't, but really you won't obey. Finances, relationships, your future, because you've never really placed 100% of your trust in God alone. But when you do trust him, your focus shifts to just obedience because he's responsible to hold you up, to provide for your needs, and to take care of you. So Israel's compromise started with a failure of belief. Martin Luther said, every sin springs from a wicked heart of unbelief. All sins start with a failure to believe. Small areas of unbelief become large areas of disaster. Again, you've got to start seeing your life like the unconquered promised land of Canaan, where you have your little Canaanites of unbelief and sin. We need to preach the gospel to every part of our lives, right? Our worries, our goals, our ambitions, our temptations, our security, our needs. We want the Holy Spirit to drive the enemy out of our heart because the unconquered areas become the means by which we're enslaved. This is why time spent with God and in his word is so important. It doesn't get better for Israel. In chapter 2, verse 12, it says, after the people of Israel abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, they went after other gods. Verse 14, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. He gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, because that's what plunderers do. Israel started to go after the gods of the people around them, and then those people enslaved them. And you're going to see this cycle repeat itself over and over again for Israel. They stop following God. They turn toward other gods. They get disciplined, usually by another nation conquering them. They cry out to God. God sends deliverance. They serve God for a while, and then they stop serving God, go after other gods, and the cycle just repeats itself. But remember, lesson number one, small areas of disbelief produce large areas of disaster. We'll hit the other two next week. So hope you all have an awesome rest of your week. Brookridge, we're back talking about David this Sunday at 9:30. We would love to see you there or streaming online. And that's it. That's Wednesday night. 20 minutes. The cat's done. And so am I. We'll talk to you all soon.